listening to Your Ultimate Life with Kellan Fluckiger, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hey there, welcome to today's LA Talk Radio show, Your Ultimate Life, the show dedicated to helping you create a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy by using the gifts, experience, talents, and stuff that you've accumulated in your life. I'm excited today because I have a fun guest who I've known for a number of years, David Schreiner-Kahn, who has created a community of corporate refugees, he called them. I love it. David, I'm not going to pretend to tell everybody all the cool stuff that you've done. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kellan. Thanks for inviting me.
You're just welcome. You're just welcome. So we're no strangers to each other. We've known each other for several years. The first thing I'd like to ask is for you to share, not modestly, but just share what you are doing right now to, the phrase I use is add good to the world. What are you doing to add good to the world?
Well, Kellan, I believe that when you, first of all, I believe that every individual has gifts, every team has gifts, and every organization has gifts. When you share your gifts, the world prospers. So I am on a mission to empower corporate refugees in particular to share their gifts with one another so that collectively they will all prosper in their own individual businesses.
We'll talk a little bit more about how that works. So corporate refugees, they've accumulated a wealth of experience, decades sometimes of experience, and now they want to share that in a different way, not in some corporate structure. So give me a couple of examples of how, as I know you've worked with many, but how someone might do that kind of thing. So people listening can like, oh yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So, I'll give you the scenario. Someone who has been a high achieving professional, typically somewhere between 20 and 40 years. They work hard. They've done well. They have gotten to a point where, in spite of the fact that they have an overflowing inbox, a full calendar, team of people around them to take care of all the things that they are not responsible for, and this built-in social structure of the team, they get to a point where either they're feeling a little burnt out, they have plateaued in their career, or perhaps something has happened that has nothing to do with their performance, some external factor like a merger, an acquisition, a market downturn in the industry that the company that they work for is in. And they either leave voluntarily or they get pushed out. And they realize that they have all this experience, they have these skills, they love what they do, they have relationships, and they go out on their own, most commonly as a solo consultant or maybe as a coach or some combination. And they start off with an empty calendar, empty inbox, no team. They're spending all this time alone. And then they have to do something they've never done before, which is they have to get up every day and sell something they've never sold before, namely themselves. And I don't care who you are and how much experience you have marketing and selling. If you have experience marketing and selling the company that gives you a paycheck, it's a very different feeling than marketing and selling yourself. So that right in and of itself, that's sort of the scenario. Day one.
I love that. And that, I mean, I did that in 2007. I left 30 years of a career and I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. When my exit was dramatic, partly fueled by personal stuff and everything, but it was that thing. And as you start trying to figure out what you're going to do, it is a different feeling. And it is a different thing about selling yourself instead of kind of that thing over there that you've been used to talking about and doing. You've described the scenario really well, and I want to dig into David a little bit. Why are you doing this? Like, what is there in your heart that says this is how you want to make a difference now at this stage in your life, is by inviting, supporting, teaching, collecting these people that fit that scenario? Why?
Yeah. Well, no surprise. The scenario describes my story. I was in corporate, and I'll describe what that means, what corporate meant to me. I was in corporate for the first 28 years of my career. I trained as an engineer. I have a master's in chemical engineering. My first two jobs were as an engineer. Um, just after my second annual review in my second job, where I got um, not only a strong performance review, but also a nice raise. A month later, my boss called me into his office and he said, "David, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you're doing a great job. The bad news is you don't have a job here anymore." So, no surprise. I was young and I was trained as an engineer. I wasn't trained in business. I didn't really focus on the business. I focused on solving engineering problems. And I didn't pay attention to the fact that the company that I worked for had lost a lot of contracts. And suddenly they ended up laying off something like half the staff. Um, so I was out on the street. To say that I was disheartened is kind of an understatement. And I did a lot of soul searching then and looked ahead at my career and thought to myself, I don't know that I want to be in the same kind of situation when I'm in my 50s or older. Maybe there's a better way to make a living. And I had actually thought about entrepreneurship at that point. I didn't know anybody who was an entrepreneur, didn't grow up in a family of entrepreneurs. I really had like not the slightest idea how that would even work. So long story short, I ended up just changing fields and I went into the nonprofit sector where I thought that perhaps the employer-employee relationship might be a little less um, a little less just about the dollars and cents. And so I worked in the nonprofit sector for the next 23 years, and it was a good run. And I was in management and leadership roles the entire time. Had several different jobs, and that earlier experience of needing to make that sudden shift was something that stayed with me. And I always knew that it was important to have a plan B. And I also knew that I really wanted more control over my career destiny. And I thought to myself, well, I really want to try this entrepreneurship thing. And along the way, I had gotten to know many people who are entrepreneurs and thought, okay, I think I can do this too. So when the next transition came along, which was after 18 years in the same job, when I felt a similar fate, again, this was not a performance issue, but there was a new CEO in my organization who I reported to, and we had some overlap in skills. So it was no surprise to me that not that long after he came on board, I was offboarded. And I thought, okay, this is my both the world is telling me something, and this is my opportunity to leave what I describe as being corporate, because you're in an organizational setting, and do my thing as an independent consultant.
So that situation came along. You were offered the opportunity to go explore those alternatives, and you took it. And you didn't go look for another job. So what was when you talk about plan B, what was your plan B? How well formulated was it? How did you step into it? Because I suspect, we're post-pandemic now. The world is changing. Jobs are changing. People don't want to go back to work. The whole landscape of what we think of freelancing is wildly on the rise. I've got a client, that's all he does is teach people like me and you that are exiting careers how to go on Upwork and other freelance careers and make a living. So what did you do to start your plan B?
Yeah, it's certainly very different today than it was when I left my last job in 2006, which was around the same time you left yours.
Mhm.
So, right. So we share that. And My plan B was I would be a nonprofit management consultant. That was what I knew best. Um, and and actually it worked pretty well in the beginning. I got clients. I had a pretty good business, and I didn't really have any plans to expand or create something beyond the business being me at that point. Um, but in spite of the fact that I was off to a good start, there were a few different things that happened along the way that really have led me to where I am now and who I feel compelled to serve.
So what happened? You started a good business. You did what you knew, which is what you said a lot of people do. They go into consulting based on what they've known. And then something else happened. It pivoted again for you. You talked before we started about hundreds or even thousands of tiny pivots. One of the things I think scares people is they have an idea about what is going to happen, and then none of it comes true. And there are all these pivots that happen all over the place. So I'm going to invite you to talk a little bit about some of those pivots, not just factually what happened, but what happened inside of you, the fears, the worries, where you found support so that you could not only deal with the pivots, but then, create something even when things were difficult.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of one that involved both fear and support simultaneously. So this was probably a year or maybe a little more after I started my business. A friend of mine who had a similar trajectory, long career in corporate, left. She went out on her own. She said, David, I'm part of this organization. I think you might find it beneficial. Why don't you come visit? Right? It was a business networking group, and I knew nothing about business networking. But I walked into the room and I saw 30 some odd people, very early in the morning with a lot of energy, all trying to support one another. And the structure was everybody got up and had 60 seconds to give a commercial. Well, I had never given a commercial. I was clueless about what to say. So talk about fear. So yeah, all not only the members, but all the guests needed to get up and give a little pitch. So I had to get up and give a pitch. I don't really recall how awful it was, but I do recall that I was quite anxious about the whole thing. And I ended up coming back to visit a second time. Then I joined, and a bunch of those people became some of my best friends as entrepreneurs, and we're still friends today, and we still do business. So yes, there was a lot of fear. It sort of starting this new track. I learned how to do business networking. I learned how to get up and give a commercial. And I also made new friends and got support.
When people go through these kinds of difficult transitions, that support is critical, but it's also really important to start to create clients. One of the things you talked about in the beginning that I resonate with and agree with is how difficult it is to talk about something that's yourself. Talk about yourself when you're selling yourself as a consultant or coach or whatever. What kinds of things have to happen so that I can get past that fear when the spotlight is on me? I can manage it, overcome it, learn some new framework. Like what has to happen to make that work?
Well, one thing that you can do is to think about a story of how you have helped somebody else and just talk about the person that you've helped. Like, where were they before your intervention and where were they after your intervention? And then say, if you want to learn more about this situation, here's how you can get in touch with me and we can talk.
That's actually a really good idea. What do you do? Like, what did you do? I'm familiar with the sort of commercial kind of thing and that kind of networking. What did you do to learn to talk about yourself, to describe your business, your offering, your opportunity in 60 seconds or some other short period of time, elevator pitch style? What did you do to get that learned?
I just kept trying. Every week I had another opportunity to do the same thing. And sometimes they were pretty awful and sometimes they were not so bad.
What does it look like to you as you think about this exodus? Like we've had the baby boomers all now mostly retired or retiring very quickly. And, we're seeing not only the generational shifts, but the societal shifts about work. Like talk about what work looks like from your perspective of being in corporate, being on your own, and now facilitating entrepreneurs making that shift. What
Yeah.
would you say to people about what work looks like?
So I would say you, and this I think was true before, and it's even more true now, which is you need to be clear with yourself what it is you really love to do, what it is you're really the most competent at doing, whom you want to serve, and what kinds of problems you can solve for them. And in addition to what kinds of problems you can solve for them, what is it that they want you to solve for them and that they're willing to pay you to solve for them? And I don't care whether you end up in a very structured job situation, whether you're doing this as an entrepreneur, whether you're the CEO of an organization, a CEO of an organization of one, or you are one person working in some fashion with others. I think the more you can own that whole equation, the better off you're going to be in not only taking control of your career, but being satisfied with where you are in your career journey.
So I love that, and I agree with it 100%. As a coach, I see the same kinds of things. I'm going to ask sort of an obvious question: is why the flip is that so hard? Because people struggle with articulating clearly what they offer, who they help, that kind of thing. Why is that so hard for people to learn to do?
Well, there are a few reasons. One is the things that are easiest for us to do, we tend to discount. For example, I have a good sense of direction. If I go from point A to point B once, very often 2 years later, I can follow the same exact route without a problem. But if you ask me to remember the details of a movie I saw 2 weeks ago, my mind goes blank. Now, I don't know what it is about my makeup that one of these things works really well and one doesn't. But I tend to assume that everybody can get from point A to point B and they don't have trouble finding their way. But it's not true, right? But it took me a long time to realize that that's something that maybe it's a gift that I have for whatever reason, but for other people, it's hard. So I think we tend to discount what we're really good at. The second thing is, um, unless you ask other people what they notice about you, you may be totally off base. And I know that this was hard for me to do when I first started my business, but I would constantly ask for feedback from clients and people that had experience working with me. And after asking a lot of times, I started to see a pattern, and I see things that I hadn't really thought of as being important skills. So I think it's hard to be objective about yourself, and I think we tend to discount where we are most valuable.
Well, that's wonderful to say that, because I agree with both those things. We do discount things that we can do naturally, and I have funny stories to tell about that. This isn't my show, so I won't tell them now. But and also, we have this whole um, inability, like you described, to see ourselves objectively, which is, of course, the value of having some kind of a mentor or community where you can do that. When you and I first met a few years ago, you were doing some podcasting and you hadn't yet created the community that you have now. Tell me about that journey, about why you did the podcast, how you collected this, and what drove you to create this community that you now have that's vibrant and that supports this kind of transition.
Sure. So one of the things that I um, that I saw other consultants doing that I wasn't doing much earlier in my business was creating content. Um, and so initially I started first a blog, and then we got some feedback from our audience about what they liked about the blog, what they didn't like about the blog, what they wanted more of. And we were creating a fair amount of content through the blog early on. Initially, it was 2 posts a week, and then we went to 5 posts a week, which was a lot more than most people that had blogs were doing. But the feedback we got was people wanted greater depth in the content, and so we decided to try audio interviews. And 10 years ago, the whole podcasting and like what you and I are doing now, that it was very different. Um, but it turned out that it actually worked pretty well, and I like doing it. So I continued to do it. Along the way, here's one of the unexpected pivots. I was approached more and more by solopreneurs for help with their businesses. And um, so my business became more focused on working with consultants and coaches as opposed to working with nonprofit organizations and small businesses. And simultaneously, my audience and network through the podcast was also mostly consultants, coaches, and other kinds of solopreneur service businesses. Um, so in terms of my interaction with entrepreneurs, it became much more focused on the same kind of journey that I had had. And so I became um, not only much more knowledgeable about um, what worked best in these kinds of businesses, but that also became all of my connections. And and in my own experience, what I have found works really well is when you are, we talked about how it's hard for you to recognize your value yourself, why it's
Mhm.
important to have others give you some feedback.
Right.
So, right, if you're doing this in some kind of group setting, whether it's a small group or a community, where the culture that is established for the group or for the community is one of being a safe space where people can give honest and helpful feedback to one another, that can be very powerful. And I've seen with the clients that we've worked with, both in group format before we started the community and subsequent to the launch of the community 2 years ago, I've seen some powerful things happen. So, for example, members that charge too little for their services. And there's, I'm sure you probably have lots of experience with this as well, right? As a coach, where consultants and coaches in particular often charge too little for the value that they provide to their clients. But if you start letting your hair down and talking about what the opportunities are before you and what you're thinking about proposing and how much you're thinking about charging, you will hear quickly, and I've seen this happen with our members. They hear from other members about, maybe they're charging too little. Maybe they should be asking for more. Here are some negotiation tips. Here are different ways you could structure the deal. Here are some different business models you might be able to utilize with a prospect. And so that kind of feedback is invaluable. And in particular, if you're able to get it from multiple people around a single problem, it can be very empowering and it can really propel your business forward. And you can make a lot more money as a result, and not kill yourself in the process.
I love that. And I want to talk for a minute about that seemingly endemic problem of consultants, coaches charging too little. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that, but I want you to tell me, you've got this community, you have worked as a consultant, you've worked with consultants and coaches, you've accumulated a group around you of people that are making that transition or have made it. Why is it that the first inclination and the second and third and fourth and maybe the 10th is to not evaluate well what the services you provide are worth? And I'm not talking about just making up some big number. Why do we do that? Why is that so difficult for coaches, consultants, and others to figure out what it's really worth? That's part one of the question.
Right.
Why is it so hard to figure that out?
Well, there are a few reasons, but one is I think most people, when they're thinking about any kind of interaction, it is very common to think about yourself first. And if you have bills to pay, like most of us do, and you have a prospect before you, it's pretty natural to think about, okay, well, if this goes through and we're able to make a deal, it's going to make it easier for me to pay my monthly expenses and support my lifestyle. And if you really want to understand what the value is that you're bringing to this relationship, you need to put yourself in the client's shoes and not think about yourself. It's not so easy to do. And the client is thinking, okay, if I make an investment in Kellan or I make an investment in David, what kind of return on investment am I going to get? And if the client can get 4 or 5 times return on investment, that's a great deal, right? So if you're going into a consulting relationship where you're going to increase the bottom line of the client by $1 million, if you're charging $10,000 for that engagement, you're probably charging too little.
I agree with you. And you've said something really key that it makes me want to repeat it. And that is, we get in, and the favorite phrase is we're always getting in our own way. And in this case, getting in your own way is, oh, I'll be able to pay rent this month, or I'll be able to, take that vacation or do whatever it is. So I better not screw this up. I better close this deal. And we think the ticket to closing the deal has to do with the price that we're charging, when it has very little to do with that. And it has to do with what you said, which is the demonstration of value for the prospect, where they can see a return that's a substantial number, and you're charging a fraction of that to help them get that return. Why is it so hard for us to get our own feelings, to get out of the equation? Like, this is common. Every coach, every consultant in the world, until they learn not to, why is it so hard to remove the ego, the want, and just to get out of this thing? Why is that so hard?
Because we're human. I think it's natural to think about what we need first. And honestly, if we don't think about what we need, how are we going to survive?
So, okay, I'm not going to take issue with that. We can have a long discussion about that, but